All right, let's try this one, dude. We're going to have to zero out one side of the equation on these. So just figure out a way, and I just always the right side of the equation. Just zero out the right side. So to zero that out, you add 6x. You've got to do that to both sides, of course, and you're left with x squared plus 14x plus 45 equals 0. Now, it says to solve. That means we're going to find two values of x, and we have to factor this trinomial. So you have to set up your two binomials just like this and decide what to put at the beginnings. And they always, the beginning is like the beginning of the triangle. It's just going to be x times x. And then the end of the trinomial, the two numbers multiplied at the end of these two binomials will multiply together to be the 45. So it could be 1 and 45, 3 and 15, or 9 and 5. But they have to add or subtract somehow to equal a 14. And there's no way these two will, no way these two will, but 9 and 5 will. So we know that it's 9 and 5. I want you guys to always put your operations in last when everything's positive. That's the easiest one there is. So now think about this. If everything in this parentheses totals up to 0, it would be 0 times all of this. And of course, that would equal 0. And the same is true in this one. If this all equals 0, then 0 times this quantity would equal 0. So the right thing to do is to set it up, set each one of the factors equal to 0, and then solve the equation. But I think you can tell that this would be a negative 9. When there's no coefficient in front of this x, you can tell that the way to make this 0 would be a negative 9 here. And you can also tell that it's a negative 5 here. Again, you can always set up the equation because you'll have to when they start getting fractional answers. But that's how it's done. And now you type in negative 5, comma, or whatever, it'll give you the braces, and you'll have the answer. Sometimes you have to move two terms to zero out the right side of the equation. So add x and subtract 4. In this case, we get x squared plus 10x and plus 0. So I don't even need to write that, equals 0. So it's a little bit different this time. Here you just, and you're always looking for a GCF, but on that last one, we just factored the trinomial. There was no GCF, so we just factored the trinomial. But here there's x in both terms, so we're going to factor a GCF out and call it x plus 10 in here equals 0. So for me, it's real obvious, but for most kids I've ever worked with, it's not obvious. They see this negative 10, or they do the x plus 10 equals 0, and they subtract 10, and get x equals negative 10. They put that in the box in delta and feel like they're done, but they forget about this. So what number here times this quantity would equal 0? That has to be 0. So if I put a 0 here, it would be 0 times 0 plus 10, which would be 0 times 10 equals 0. And of course, that works. And negative 10 also works because it would be on negative 10 times, which is negative 10 times 0. So you get two answers when you're working with quadratics. Okay, I sure hope that helps.